Welcome Home, a podcast for veterans, about veterans by veterans, is a project of Willing Warriors and the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Good morning. I'm your host, Larry Ziliaks, Director of Culinary Services here at the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run. And this week, our guest is Frank Larkin. He's a former Navy SEAL, as well as sort of the words that I hate to say, a Gold Star parent, and we'll get into that a little bit later. He's also the CEO of Troops First Foundation, which has an amazing program called Warrior Call. I really want to talk to him about that. When I did a little research and was looking into the organization and that program, and it really is very similar to a program we have here at the retreat as well. So, Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Larry. I appreciate the opportunity being on today with your listeners and hopefully having a discussion that brings value to them.
Absolutely. Listen, our listeners love to hear about Tier 1 operators. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about, number one, why you joined the Navy and not the Air Force, and two, your time in the teams.
Well, I go back towards the tail end of the Vietnam era, and I was one of those that had a low draft number. When that lottery came about, I was in high school and just about to graduate. I decided that I was going to try to take my destiny in my own hands, which I have pretty much tried to do throughout my life. And I enlisted in the Navy. For whatever reason, I had just an interest in the Navy. Kind of a contradiction in I guess terms, but I really wasn't all that interested in riding the big gray hulls, so to speak, and floating around the world as much as I was in maybe doing some other things. I got interested in the SEAL teams from a good friend of mine that I had known for years who had become a SEAL. It was not a very well-known option in the Navy. At that time, we're talking, 1974, 75 time frame that, the teams were not something that anybody had a lot of information on. And it was not an option that was pushed by the other commands. In fact, when I initially applied, my command did everything they could to stonewall my application to the teams. But at the time they were, looking for trainees, and it was given a higher priority. And I subsequently got my orders, to go to training. And then once through that, was assigned to an East Coast SEAL team. At that time, they only had two, Team 1 on the West Coast and Team 2 on the East Coast. And just had a great run with them for a number of years until, quite frankly, I decided to get out to pursue a college degree with the full intention of coming back into the teams, but had gotten bitten in the meantime by the law enforcement bug and vectored towards a law enforcement career.
How many years were you in?
8 years. So it was a pretty good chunk of time. A lot of travel, a lot of different experiences. It was a formative time in my life. Went in when I was 18 years old, and of course you have all the answers when you're 18.
Sure.
And I just felt I wasn't ready for college, and I just needed to experience what the real world was like, and I thought this was a pretty good path to do it.
Wow. And so you separated, you went into federal law enforcement?
Initially, I went into local law enforcement. I walked the beat for about a year in the Philadelphia area. Probably another formative experience. As a white guy dropped into a neighborhood that wasn't exactly asking for a beat cop. they hadn't had one for about over 20 years, walking the neighborhood.
Mm.
I definitely, stood out. And, and despite, I had, my SEAL training and experience behind me, I was in no way prepared for that environment. And I came to understand pretty quickly that I needed to figure it out, or I was going to go home every night pretty black and blue.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
was going to be a tough year on the street.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out to be, I would say, one of the best experiences of my life to really get into a community, earn their trust, and really understand, different sides of our society. We're always quick to pick up the lens that we're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
to look at things, and sometimes we fail to pick up, the lens of the folks that we're dealing with, or the culture that we're dealing with, to understand how things really work, on the ground.
Sure.
I came away from that experience with three things that I often pass on to young officers or public servants. And that is, kind of an old piece of guidance that we got from our grandparents. And that is, always treat people the way you want to be treated.
Mm.
And I've just added a little bit to that. And I said, you also have to ask the question reversed: how do you think they need to be treated, or they want to be treated?
Mm-hmm.
More importantly. Second point was always treat others with respect, no matter, where they come from, what they've done. And the third is never take anybody's dignity away, because the end result of that is usually you're going to wind up wrestling on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Things aren't going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
And so the three legs of that stool have served me well through life as I've come to in contact with different people, different cultures. Something I've tried to pass on to a lot of the younger folks that are getting into different aspects of public service in our society. And I think it's, stage guidance that certainly has, as I said, not only served me well, but those that I think have listened and tried to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So there comes a time when your son, Ryan, follows in his father's footsteps and becomes a Navy SEAL. What was that like?
Well, let me amend that statement a little bit.
Okay.
I don't think that he followed in my footsteps to do, to mirror or walk the same path intentionally. I really do believe that it was a choice that he made independent of, my prior service. He very much was affected by what happened on 9/11, as many of your listeners
Mm-hmm.
were. It's a time and place in our history, in our memory, that is permanently, stamped. Everyone knows where they were, what they were doing, and many of the people in our society from that time period were, very much moved by what happened. He witnessed that event from a town where we lived just west of New York City. My office at that time was a federal law enforcement office, was located in the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I had gotten caught up in that attack. Probably should have been dead about 5 times that day from different things that happened around me, to me, and initially was reported missing. And he was completely enveloped in all that, witnessing it, as I said, from a high ground position just west of the city, saw the towers come down.
Mm.
And I was able to get home that night, and to my family, I knew I had to. And I walked through the door at midnight that night. I had been, cut up and banged up. I was wearing a pair of sweats that were about 3 times larger than I was after being decontaminated, and walked in. I just saw the looks of horror and just emotional, just trauma that on the faces of my family, and especially my son. And he had, at the time, was about 14 years old, was in middle school, and For the next 2 weeks following 9/11, he just completely withdrew, became isolated, stopped talking, stayed in his room. My wife approached me and said, something's wrong. I, meanwhile, was down at ground zero as my agency's representative for the rescue recovery operations that were going on down there. And he said, something's wrong with him. He's not handling this very well. And we had about 18 people around us in the town that we lived who did not come home that night.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to school with a lot of those kids, of those parents that were lost.
Mm.
And when I confronted him, he said, Dad, I need to understand what happened here. And, in a way that a 14-year-old expresses themselves, and said, I want you to take me down to ground zero to see what happened. And I said, well, I just don't think that's going to be a good idea. And I know your mom's not going to go for it. And he says, but I just need to understand what happened. And I said, all right. I said, I'll do this. Something tells me that you need to do this. I'll see what I can do. And got his mother to sign off on it with the proviso that if I saw anything that indicated he wasn't dealing with it, that we were immediately out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can imagine, 2 weeks after 9/11, things were pretty nasty down there.
Sure.
They had finally determined that the air to breathe that we were breathing was not safe. And so everybody was now in respirators after a week and a half of inhaling all that raw material.
Mm-hmm.
And I took him down there and dressed him up in a police jacket and a respirator and a helmet, so nobody could tell that it was a 14-year-old walking around. And we walked the debris field, which was immense. I mean, blocks on blocks of southern Manhattan, and a scale of destruction I think that nobody really appreciates unless they were there.
Mm-hmm.
About 3.5 hours later, basically had made our way all the way around. I tried to share what I was doing that day. I had lost memory of some time, so I don't know if I got knocked unconscious or whatever, but I did the best to recall what had happened and then where things once were. And I said, you had enough? Have you seen it all? He said, yeah, I appreciate you bringing me down here. And that kind of was it. And he kind of came out of his shell, returned to being a 14-year-old. And then some years later, he graduated from high school. He had been working, I had been transferred back to Washington, D.C. We were living in the Annapolis area, Maryland, and he was finishing up high school. And I said, so what are you going to do with yourself now? He had not, I almost saw a little bit of B in him. He said, I'm not ready for college. Though he was a smart kid, he just wasn't ready. And I kind of understood that. And I said, well, you got a year to kind of do your thing. And then, you're on the street, a little tough love. And he says, okay, I got it. And at the time he was diving as a salvage diver in the Annapolis areas, cleaning, rich people's boat bottoms and changing their running gear out and so forth, and recovering stuff that they had, dropped over the edge of their boats. And he was doing that year round. So, he's getting a little taste of what it was like to be in cold water and, work in inclement conditions. But he came home about 9 months after he graduated from high school, and he said, I just enlisted in the Navy, and oh, by the way, I volunteered for the SEAL program. And I said, you did what? And he says, yep, that's just what I did. And at that point, my eyes shifted to my wife, who was reaching into the knife drawer. Now I'm thinking, here it comes. And I said to her, hey, no, hold on. This is the decision he's made. We've got to support him, whether we like it or not. So I never really pushed him in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
Never really had a lot of conversation with him. I got him to talk to a number of guys because we lived in the Annapolis area next to the Naval Academy. A couple of the guys that had become SEALs and had been to theater already, experienced war. And I said to them, look, don't hold back. Give him the good, bad, ugly, you name it. Don't sugarcoat anything. And so he spent nearly a day with those folks and came out of that even more invigorated. So off he went. He went into training. Again, he wasn't a standout athlete, but he physically was very adept. He was an intelligent kid, not always applied it, but had a unique ability to abstract. In other words, think second, third order effects, which made him very valuable in planning things. And, much to my surprise, but certainly to a level of pride that I had never experienced, he made it through SEAL training, through the advanced warfare courses, and got to pin his trident on him. Just an unbelievable moment of pride and just respect for him and all the other men and women who had stood up following 9/11 to go, as he said it, to be part of the solution, so that what happened on 9/11 never happens again. And I think your listeners that part of that time will fully understand that emotion and that need to serve at that time.
Yeah.
And he initially went off to become a special operations medic. Went through that training, came out of the top of his class, and immediately deployed to Iraq. Within days of that deployment, he was in contact with the enemy. Did a 6-month pump there out in the western part of Iraq, Fallujah, Ramadi, and then came back. They go through a whole reset like many of the units do, and he found himself back in Iraq again on this time up north on a more of an HVI, high value individual pursuit mission that lasted about 6 months. And then he volunteered to fill a gap in Afghanistan. They had lost a SEAL medic. They needed a senior medic to go in to fill the gap. And he rogered up, came home for 2 weeks, reset, and, pumped out for another 6 months in Afghanistan, which was kind of an interesting kind of comparison, because everyone immediately assumed that, Iraq, Afghanistan, they're similar. They're both in the, that part of the world, but they were polar opposites of each other for those that had been to both places. Different challenges, different landscape, so it was a real eye opener for him. So he came home from that deployment, and that was the first indication that we had that, things were changing. Of course, he was now a frogman. He was, been to 3 deployments. He was pretty experienced. But now we started to hear about, hey, I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm having nightmares. He stopped smiling. He had a relationship, a breakup with his girlfriend that he had been living with for 5 years. Things were changing. He went off to train as a SEAL sniper, finished up that training at the top of his class, and then deployed again to Afghanistan, his 4th deployment down into the Helmand area. His previous deployment had been in Uruzgan. Both were hot areas, and saw a lot of action. Came home from his 4th deployment, and that's saw some more changes, but nothing that really was ringing the bell, so to speak. The alarm bells. You knew these deployments were tough. You knew that they were, getting their cage rattled, and the fact that he was home in one piece, I was very grateful. He got assigned to be the senior enlisted, they call the lead petty officer of their special operations urban combat training for all the close in quarter battle, tactics and so forth. And what I didn't realize at that time, that, it's one thing, you're in combat and so forth, and you're being exposed to explosive effects. But as he was in this role as this pre-deployment trainer in this close quarter battle scenario, they were constantly using breaching charges and flashbang or concussion grenades, and they were using their weapon systems that they were going to deploy with, and they were on the rocket ranges, the mortar ranges, and so forth. So he was constantly being exposed to the blast over pressures from these weapon systems. And he spent, better, a year in that role. And then we started really starting to see things kind of come apart. He started developing bouts of anxiety. Never, he never had anxiety issues, depression, became hypervigilant, stopped smiling. He continued to have sleep issues. They were just getting worse. He was in pain. A lot of these folks they're all in pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain, a combination thereof. They're in pain. And a lot of them, their first choice, their first, go-to remedy is what?
Drugs and alcohol.
Alcohol. Yeah. And then followed up by, yeah, you're right, the drugs, because the way our system dealt with those issues is they focus on treating the symptoms, not the root cause. And so they started putting him on all these prescription drugs to deal with that stuff, mood stabilizers, and he just continued to come apart. He was able to get an appointment at NICO, which was the National Intrepid Center of Excellence in Bethesda, Maryland, to come up for extensive studies for about a month. They put him through every, conceivable imaging, evaluation. They did blood tests on him, you name it, tooth to tail, they evaluated his mental status. And diagnosed that he was suffering from, severe PTSD, and no mention of, any brain injury, or even though he was having issues with his vision and hearing and balance and memory was shot. It was all focused on, alcohol abuse and PTSD. And it got to the point where he could no longer safely operate or do his job as the LPO at that training section, and they moved him into a more of an admin position while they directed him towards some of the low-hanging fruit that they were offering to deal with his issues, mainly focused on alcohol. And that didn't go well, and he just continued to unravel. They started to hang labels on him and make judgments that, justified their assessments and their actions. And it became clear that they were kind of putting stuff together to get him out. They were kicking him to the curb. This is despite, continued policy and broadcast that, hey, look, if something's wrong, if you're not feeling good, come and get help. We're here for you. That's not what happened. When he stepped forward to get help, it got weaponized against him. And I'm sure, a lot of your listeners will kind of are nodding that they experienced the same. It's what we've now come to call, or at least it's catching traction, institutional betrayal. It's, when you step up on the line and you swear to do everything you can to protect this nation, to do the best for the service that you're serving. And then all of a sudden, when you need some help or things happen to you, that entity, turns on you, or it stops listening to you, or it, if it's too hard, it kicks you to the curb. It's damaged goods.
This is something that's really prevalent in the Tier 1 community, in that I think it's a command issue where they want to help you, and they say they're going to help you, and they will help you to a certain extent. But then they're going to look at you and say, look, you're no longer able to fulfill the role that you had. You need to get out so the VA can help you. We can't carry you anymore. And I see that as a command issue. It also leads to that sense of betrayal, which then just adds moral injury onto the pot. And it also then keeps other Tier 1 operators from self-identifying issues, because they see what's going to happen. And when they know it's going to take them out of the game, and they don't want to, this is what they do, this is their life. And I mean, we just hear this story over and over and over again. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is, because I see it from the command staffing level, they're like, well, we need to fill that position. But you can't do both. You can't do both at the same. Come forward, we will help. And it turns out we will help you get out is what they're really saying.
Larry, I couldn't have said it better. And thank you for saying what you said. You outlined it perfectly. I don't think there's any malicious intent, but these services are about operations. And as long as you can contribute to operations, you're good to go. When you no longer can contribute to operations, then you become a weight, an anchor. You occupy space. You take up oxygen that they need, to dedicate towards fulfilling their,
mission,
resourcing and manpower, their mission, you name it. And that's where a lot of this, as I talk to veterans and special operators, conventional guys and gals that, have been on a rocky road. I mean, this is pretty much, as soon as we talk about this issue of institutional betrayal, they literally leap out of their seat, become very emotional. And so this is, to your point, something that it's a leadership issue. Now, okay, full agreement with, the need for good order and discipline and operational priorities and so forth. But, to your point, you can't speak out both sides of your mouth.
Yeah.
And say that we're not going to leave anybody behind, but then you turn around and there's a whole debris field behind us.
Yeah.
So I think, part of it is that we have not effectively equipped, our operational leaders with the information that they need to be able to deal with these situations. So there's a education knowledge gap. And then it hasn't been backstopped with the resources to be able to effectively, rehabilitate and recover these folks.
Yeah.
I see a great separation between the medical enterprise and the operational medical enterprise, in the sense that, all these units have their medical cadres, but how closely are they really tied to their command elements? How much are they really advocating for those injured warriors, or are they just trying to tell the command what they want to hear? And that's not in all cases, but in many cases, that's exactly what happens. And absent the knowledge and the science, or for instance, in Ryan's case, the imaging that would have shown, brain damage, or a blood marker that would have shown that his, testosterone levels, his cortisol levels, and other hormones and chemicals are out of whack, then, most of it defaults towards a mental health diagnosis, because that's kind of what they've been calling it since World War I, when we first introduced explosives to the battlefield. They've been calling it all types of different names: battlefield psychosis, warrior's heart,
shell shock,
PTSD, shell shock, you name it, to explain. But it's the same thing. These people look 100% physically, they look 100% intact. I mean, it's one thing if you have somebody that's missing a leg, an arm, or has been, burned or somewhat disfigured. I mean, that's very visible. But these invisible wounds are tangible, are real to the people that are living them, and even more so to their families that are struggling to understand what's going on.
Yeah, they're very debilitating, for sure. I do want to direct my listeners to something that you said, was that when his role changed operationally and he went into more of an instructor role, and then was therefore subjected to more of the blasts. We did an episode back in season 2, it's episode 6, with Dr. James Stone, who is a research scientist.
University of Virginia.
Yeah. So Dr. Stone came on, and it was a fascinating about how they started thinking, okay, we need to study door kickers, but it turned out that the instructors from the EOD and other courses that were subject to many more smaller blasts were the ones that were being subjected to real health issues. And so I want our listeners to listen to that episode 6 in season 2, because it's a fascinating look at how this issue, thank goodness, is starting to be studied. But it shows that the general thinking, which those operational and in the field might be subject to, a large explosion 3 times during a 6-month deployment, that's not going to have the same impact. And please go back and listen to that or that episode, because it was really, really fascinating, and really, it really made me think when you said that's when he started to have real problems.
Yeah, so James Stone is a pioneer, one of the pioneers in this, and he's got his teeth in this like a dog on a bone, trying to, understand and figure this out. And I'm glad that you had him on, and he's right. I mean, as we, kind of dug into this, we found out, at least for the GWAT veterans, 80% or more of this exposure happened in the training environment.
Yeah.
And now that we're not in a declared formal conflict, you have to assume that 100% of this exposure from our weapon systems and so forth is coming from the training environment, which is something we can control. So this all came to light, Larry, when Ryan had to get out. He was honorably discharged. And to your point, they basically, you said it perfectly. We've done all we can for you. No easy fix here. We don't have time for this. And then it was all about getting him out.
Yeah.
And so he honorably discharged, with the advice of, hey, the VA will do a better job. They're prepared. They're better prepared to take care of you, because we've done everything we can.
Yeah.
And so he is out for about a year. He's gone to the VA, which is, in itself, was a challenge. I don't think I'm a complete idiot, but, I'm trying to shepherd him through their maze of bureaucracy. And here's a guy that had once been, on the top of the mountain as a highly revered, decorated, SEAL operator, now can't even organize his way through the day, let alone try to figure out the VA's, maze of
forms and apps
that organization
and everything they throw at you.
And people that are talking to you have no clue about what you've been through.
Yeah.
And yet are making these assessments. And so, to him, he was losing, he was becoming disenfranchised. He was losing trust in them, as he had with the defense health side of it when he was in the military. So we're sitting around a fire one night, and something he constantly was saying that came back to haunt me. And that was, nobody's listening to me. They just keep telling me I'm crazy. Something's wrong with my head. Nobody's listening to me. And that was reinforced by all the drugs and so forth that they had prescribed him over a 2-year period. 40 different, potions, lotions, creams, all the way up to high-end psychotropics that made him feel like he wasn't even in his own body. And he says to me, I'm banged up inside. I don't think I'm going to live all that long. And of course, as a father, I'm saying to him, hey, look, I'm here. I got your back. We're swim buddies. We'll get through this. He says, I know, Dad, I know you're here, but if anything happens to me, I want you to donate my brain or my body for traumatic brain injury breacher syndrome research. And, most of your folks know that breachers are those that have the controlled explosives and they blow through doors, walls, or whatever else needs to be popped. And I said, let's not even talk about that. He says, no, Dad, you got to promise me. So I said, yep, I promise, but nothing's going to happen to you. And sure enough, a month later, and I had asked him, hey, you're not thinking about hurting yourself or, and he said, no, I'll never go that way. And unfortunately, about a month and a half later, I found him in the basement of our home, and he had taken his life. He was dressed in a SEAL Team 7 t-shirt, red, white, and blue board shorts, and had illuminated his a shadow box I had made for him with all his medals, insignias, and stuff. And it just instantly, ripped my heart in half. Sure. I mean, I have had, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating my chest or this is not something I'm bragging about, but in my line of work for 35, 40 plus years, I've, it's all been about saving other people. And in the end, I couldn't save my own son, and I carry that burden. So anyway, we satisfied his wish to get and donated his brain for a research effort. that was looking at blast exposure and its relationship to traumatic brain injury. And 2 months later, they called us in and said that, your son Ryan had an undiagnosed severe case of microscopic brain injury that is uniquely, and they emphasized, uniquely related to blast exposure. They said, we only see this pattern of injury in those individuals that have been exposed to blasts. And it's not the same as CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy that you hear from the football players and the physical impact
Right.
of playing, sports. Though it shares the same, disadvantage, you can't see this in a living person yet. We just don't have the technology. And as I said, he had been to NICO and had all these extensive tests done, and they never saw anything in his brain. Even though he had, a whole profile of exposure to IEDs, to, training with heavy weapon systems, being subjected to explosions and so forth. And a lot of the symptoms that he was manifesting were, related to, traumatic brain injury. But guess what? They're also related to PTSD. So because the mental health community had been, largely, the guiding, path for a lot of these, treatments and assessments and so forth, and everything kind of pointed towards or emphasized was the PTSD and the mental health, the mental illness aspect of it.
Sure.
So that kind of broke things open. And with that information, I went to the SEAL Command, and I got to give them great credit. As much as I had, conflicted emotions in the sense that, hey, you dudes screwed this up. You missed the signs. You were not true to our ethos of not leaving somebody behind. And in some cases, because they didn't know what they didn't know. In other cases, it was because they were trying to do the right thing the right way, maybe all the wrong way. And then you had those individuals that were more worried about their rank and career and not having to deal with a broken frogman that just wanted this problem to go away as fast as they could, kick him to the curb.
Sure.
But I will say, when I put this information in front of them, it completely shattered the story or the account of Ryan's death that had been formulated. And I got to give great credit to the SEAL admiral that was in charge of the community. He says, there's something here. This is not what I was told. And we need to dig into this. And sure enough, the more and more we got into it, the more we started to realize there was something here. We need to get it on top of it. And so as things started to develop, folks like James Stone got involved from UVA, Dan Pearl, a world-renowned neuropathologist from Bethesda, Walter Reed, who discovered this injury. You got Brian Edlow up in Boston, Mass General, Harvard, other great researchers and folks that started dogpiling on, hey, what's actually going on here? So the body of evidence is building, and it's bringing a greater level of attention, not only, from the outside, centers of excellence that are looking at this, but within the Department of Defense, and certainly Congress has now picked up on this. So, really, I see, as far as this blast overpressure and this brain trauma, the way that the greatest wins will occur in the prevention side. But in the meantime, we got people that are hurt now, and we got to figure out how to better treat them.
Yeah, clearly, based on somebody's job description, what they do, this needs to be a presumptive condition. You can't just wait for somehow certain symptoms to materialize. I think you got to look at these Tier 1 operators and anybody in these training roles, whether they're Marines or Air Force or Navy, if they're working in a job that subjects them to repeated blast exposure, this is to be a presumptive condition, not only throughout their medical treatment while they're in service, but the VA needs to take a look and start to flag these people by job description that there's a higher risk for this. I mean, it's just, there's enough evidence out there that this is an issue that something like that can't be done. I don't understand why it's not being done. And like you say, because the symptoms parallel, they're being dealt with on a mental health issue when there's a lot more going on. And unfortunately, I really don't see a solution to that issue anytime soon. But I wanna focus in on the organization to the Troops First Foundation and Warrior Call. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what they do and really what you want them to know about the Troops First Foundation and Warrior Call?
And thank you for the question. And really, Troops First came about because of the issues related to those coming home from war. And initially, it was focused on taking, a lot of personalities and so forth overseas to meet with the troops to kind of, pump up their morale and give them, something different to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But then evolved into a program called Proper Exit, where Rick Hell, who is the CEO of Troops First, recognized that a lot of the folks at Walter Reed, all they wanted to do was go back to their units. As badly as they were banged up, the one thing they had in common is they want to be reunited with their units.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this huge gap because they were medevaced off the battlefield. They were taken back to, a role facility for treatment, then probably on to Landstuhl and over to and back to Bethesda or down in San Antonio. And this all happened, like in some cases, within 24 to 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that was of value to them, anything that represented who they were, was cut away on the battlefield. They had nothing and no way to communicate with their folks, and their teammates had no way to communicate with them. So they came up with this Proper Exit, where they started taking folks back to the war theater, back to the units, the areas of operation, for that closure that they never had when they were scooped off the battlefield. So that evolved into some other programs for housing, K9, sponsoring folks for some therapies and so forth. And then out of that, just by the evolution of how things were progressing, came Warrior Call, which is simply a recognition that isolation is a huge factor that we see with veterans that are in a tough place. As they become disenfranchised, as they lose trust, as they lose hope, they slide, into dark places, and they close off from folks and from family, and they become isolated. And the further they get into that period of isolation, the greater the chance that something bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
And as we came to understand that, our whole objective was to defeat isolation, and we said we needed to keep this simple, and we needed to deputize people to help us. It wasn't going to be any one organization. So you had mentioned at the beginning of this that you have a similar type of outreach, American Legion, some others, they call different names, but it's really the same concept. And that is, hey, reach out to those that have served, reach out to teammates, to first responders, make a call to them, take a call from them if they're calling you,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes they just need to talk to somebody, and then have an honest conversation, just kind of see how they're doing, and it's something as simple as, hey, Tommy, I was just going through, I saw your name. I just thought I'd give you a call. I know we haven't talked in years, but, I just thought, hey, I'll call and we'll kind of shoot the bull for a while and,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of get that conversation going. Or Sally, you see the phone, it's Sally calling, and, you served together in Iraq. She just needed to talk to somebody. So you answered the phone, and it's just that contact, or a drive-by visit, just to, hey, check on you, see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable how much feedback we've gotten from folks that said that they were in a dark, isolated place. And that phone call, that conversation, whether it was over the phone or a face-to-face visit, pulled them back from the edge, reinforced that, one, they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there that care, and that's important, and that it connects them back to their tribe that they've gotten disconnected from, which is really important.
Mm-hmm.
To be part of a tribe. to remain part of something. And then, to have hope and understand that there are people working, they're there interested in helping them, that are working on these issues. At times, it doesn't move as fast as we want it to, but it's moving. And so that's where we're trying to generate this momentum, with all the foundations, the VSOs, to kind of make this, like part of our culture, to make these calls, to honor those that have served in uniform. Like I said, whether it's a military uniform or as a first responder, because you remember there are domestic warriors.
Mm-hmm.
Our first responders are those that are operating inside the wire,
Mm-hmm.
and they deal with just some unbelievable challenges themselves.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what Warrior Call is. We have a National Warrior Call Day, which is just a kind of a mark in the sand. It's the first Sunday after Veterans Day.
Mm.
But we really want this to be a unity of effort with all the VSOs, all the foundations that kind of push this out to their membership, to their listeners, and say, hey, I'm going to be part of this. This is too easy to pick up my phone and call a buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, listeners, the first thing I want you to do is visit the webpage, and it's warriorcall.org, O-R-G. Take a look at it and think about, how you can help. Then go over to troopsfirstfoundation.org, which is basically the parent organization of Warrior Call. And it's there that you're going to see that red donate button that you see on every VSO webpage out there. I want you to bang on it and give whatever you can. I know that you hear me say this for every nonprofit that comes on, but they all need money. This isn't free. And please, hit that donate button. Check out every inch of these web pages, because there's some really valuable resources there and information. And look, if you're part of a Legion or VFW post, share it with your members. Get the word out. A lot of it's very similar to our program that we have here, which is HOPE, is spelled 988+1, Operation Save the Number. And it's basically a trifold brochure that talks about veteran suicide, but has instructions on how to save 988+1 in an Android phone or an iPhone. And what we want our veterans to do is save that number in their buddy's phone and use those instructions. If you're not in the area here, you can download that brochure right on our webpage. It'll tell you how to save that number. Put it in your buddy's phone and say, look, if you're having a bad day, call me. If I don't answer, don't go through with what you're thinking. Press this button and talk to a VA counselor. So please check out Warrior Call, share it, and they're just doing amazing work and saving one life at a time. It's convincing people to put a pause in that thought process, and you can do that by reaching out and calling people you served with. It's that simple, really. What's the one thing that you want our listeners to know the most about Troops First Foundation and Warrior Call?
Well, one of the things we hadn't talked about, but is part of the calculus here, is that we're trying to influence some legislative change and so forth that helps to focus more on what we've been talking about, not only the blast over pressure and invisible wounds, but really the need to not leave any more of our veterans behind. And you talked about the VA, whether it's Defense Department or the VA, we've got to help them succeed. And right now there's a big gap between the information sharing between the Defense Department and the VA that we're trying to work on right now with improving their case management system as far as health records, making it across that canyon that exists right now between Defense Health and the VA. Because a lot of our veterans complain about that, hey, I have to keep telling my story over and over again when I go to the VA, and there's no continuity, and you know so we're trying to help with that. There's some legislation coming out that is going to hopefully direct the VA to take a more aggressive role towards these invisible wounds and blast over pressure considerations beyond just the mental health, because they go hand in hand. It's not one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's really our efforts now are to get together with organizations like Willing Warriors and others, the big DSOs, to have a unity of effort to kind of harmonize our voice so that we can get the attention of Congress, we can get the attention of the administration and their departments, so that we can solve this, and that we are not leaving a huge debris field behind us as a consequence of all these men and women who stood up and raised their right hand to serve this nation and protect our values and ensure our security. So, as far as troops first and warrior call, that's what we're pointed at. We're trying to keep it simple, but yet be the voice of the veterans, much like your organization and others, to, keep moving the ball forward and hopefully slap the table one day and say, you know, we had 0 suicides. We have,
Yeah.
We figured this out, and I do. One's too many.
Yep.
One suicide is too many. The other thing I would say is our solutions have to be kind of configured for one size fits one, not one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
Which means, and you brought this up, and it's very, very much a factor. We have to learn how to listen to these folks, and they're not broken. They're not damaged goods. They're hurt. They're injured. So let's help them heal.
Yeah, it's an injury that results from combat. There's just absolutely no doubt about it, and it's got to be really viewed as though it's the same as if somebody lost an arm or a leg. It's an injury, and it needs to be treated. Yeah, so much more can be done, and I tell you, I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, and just getting the word out. It's huge, and listeners, call your congressperson, and they all have a veteran liaison, somebody in their office that all they do is deal with veteran issues. Find out who that is and send them links. Send them a link to the podcast and say, hey, you need to pay attention to this. Send them information about Dr. Stone's work and email them and get on a first name basis with them. Share as much information as you can with them about what's going on in your community when it comes to veteran affairs, because it comes down to money. It's all about funding. And we can talk till we're blue in the face, and we can wish that this kind of research is done. But unless Congress actually funds it, unless they give money to the VA that's earmarked for research about this, it's not going to happen. That money will be spent elsewhere. So if you're going to talk to your congressional representatives, focus in on funding and say, this is a problem, it needs research, and that research needs funding. What are you going to do to make that happen? So please reach out to your representatives and send them information and say, this is a serious problem and it needs to be dealt with. Frank, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and talking about your story, and I know I speak for our listeners about, we're just devastated by the loss of your son, and he's such a patriot and an amazing young man that sacrificed for his country, and we're just sorry you had to go through that.
Well, this is all about preventing others from having to walk this path of pain. And it's very refreshing to talk to someone like you who gets it. I want to tell you, express to your listeners that, Larry, you get it. You've obviously, stitched this together, the right way. You're spot on with your assessments. I look forward to working with you in the future. I hope that, again, collectively, as I said, we can influence the changes so that we take care of those who took care of us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know I'm a commissioner on the local county Veterans Commission, and we'll be talking about this at our next meeting for sure. So really, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for coming on.
You bet. And thank you to your listeners too. Have a great day.
Yeah. So, hey, listeners, we'll have another episode next Monday morning. In fact, we're going to start up our series again on Northern Virginia military museums with our guest will be Gary Powers Jr., who started the Cold War Museum over in Vint Hill. If the name sounds familiar, he's the son of Francis Gary Powers, the YouTube pilot who was shot down over Russia. And maybe most of our listeners know his story from the Tom Hanks movie, Bridge of Spies. But Gary will be with us next week for a great episode. So until then, you can find us on all major podcast platforms. We're on YouTube and Wreaths Across America Radio. So thanks for listening.
The Welcome Home podcast is brought to you by Willing Warriors, a nonprofit organization serving active duty service members and veterans since 2012. To learn more, please visit our webpage at willingwarriors.org.